Hello, my name is Naguura, and today we're talking about the Moonkin Covenant choice, specifically for raiding in Castle Nathria. So over the course of Shadowlands beta, we received a lot of changes to our Covenant abilities. We went from our best Covenant being Night Fae over to Venthyr, and at some point we even had Necrolord as our best Covenant, and at the very end we ended up with Kyrian being our best. It seemed to be pretty clear that we are going Kyrian until they buffed Night Fae a few days ago. And now we have to make a decision between Kyrian and Night Fae. I will list some of the pros and cons of the two covenants to help you make this decision, on top of giving you my opinion on it, so let's get into it. First, let's look at the two abilities in case you don't know what they do. Kyrian has Kindred Spirits. The TLDR is you are bonding to another damage dealer and activating that bond every 1 minute to increase each other's damage for 10 seconds. Now, the Night Fae ability, Convoke the Spirits, the TLDR is within a 4 seconds channel, you cast 16 druid abilities. On average, it is 10 to 11 damage abilities, so Moonkin abilities, and 5 to 6 off-spec abilities, so heals if you're in range, and possibly bear and cat abilities if you're close to your target. Now moving into the pros and cons, first off I'd like to say that Night Fae is the best for a pure single target. But I actually believe that Kyrian will be better in the raid, and I'll explain my reasoning after talking about the pros and cons. Disclaimer for the Simcraft graph, this is not a finalized sim. The new Convoke isn't 100% implemented yet, so just keep that in mind when you look at this sim. Alright, let's move on to the pros of Kyrian. Number 1, versatile. Now this ability scales with any number of targets and you can pick and choose where you want to put your damage in. This is pretty important in a raiding environment, so that is really good for the Empower Bond ability. Number 2, it's a short CD. It's a 1 minute cooldown, which is good for many situations in the raid, and it allows you to funnel damage into priority targets more often if needed. For example, Sludge Fist in Castle Nathria gets a 100% damage increase on him approximately every 70 seconds that lasts 12 seconds. So that would be perfect for Empower Bond because it's a 1 minute cooldown, so you can always align it with every damage increase on the boss, and it's the same duration as well, approximately. Number 3, good survivability with the extra potion that not only does it heal you, but it also removes a curse, magic effect, poison, or it also removes a bleed effect, which can be incredibly good for some situations. And you also get less magic damage taken with Pelagos if you're Kyrian, which can also be really good because the raid is pretty magic damage heavy. And survivability is actually pretty important overall in a raiding environment, so I would definitely take this as a positive thing about Kyrian because survivability is just as important as anything else, because if you die, you're not going to do any more damage, right? Now, moving to the cons of Kyrian. Number 1, you are reliant on another player, because you get less damage if the player you bonded with doesn't do at least the same damage as you do within the empowerment window. I'd say this is definitely an issue, because it requires you to figure out which other player to buff that gives you the most value, and you need to communicate properly with that player. So if you aren't in a progression guild and you are mainly pugging, I'd say you would rather go with another covenant that requires less coordination. Number 2. You can lose damage from taking damage. This is a bit more complicated, but the pool of damage you receive from your partner can also be used for absorb for incoming damage. So if you empower the bond during a heavy incoming damage phase, then you might lose a lot of damage to absorb. Number 3, it's not best in slot for single target. Night Fae is better on pure single target. Alright, moving on to Night Fae. First of all, we're gonna go over the pros. Number 1, it's a big burst CD and it feels really good to use. On some fights, you need more damage in certain windows, and then this bigger cooldown compared to the 1 minute cooldown can be better. It really heavily depends on the fight and the fight length as well. Number 2, it's best in slot for pure single target, as we saw in that graph earlier. Number 3, it has a movement ability, that blink ability. Now, unfortunately, this is not that great because Moonkin already has a lot of mobility, so it might not be needed for many fights. Now, moving on to the cons of Night Fae. The CD of Convoke the Spirit does not align with your Celestial Alignment or your Incarnation because it's 3 minutes versus 2 minutes. This means you have to sometimes use either cooldown without the other, or you have to hold one cooldown for the other, and it just feels bad. Now, number 2, it's worse for AoE. Unfortunately, Convoke the Spirits does not cast Starfires. It only casts Star Surge, Starfall, Wrath, and sometimes Full Moon. So the more targets there are, the worse this ability becomes, because you can only have one Starfall up at a time, and therefore casting more does nothing. Number 3, RNG. Now, this is the most important point and the most con about this Convoke ability, and it is the RNG factor of it. This is also the reason why I think Kyrian is better overall for the raid. Now, the first RNG part to Convoke is that it's random how many Star Surges you cast, and it casts more Moonfires when there are more available targets within 45 yards range of your character. Now, you want to cast as many Star Surges as possible, so the more Star Surges are replaced with Moonfires or Wraths, the worse it becomes. The second part of RNG to Convoke is that it hits random targets within the 45 yards. So any target that is in combat with you can be hit. This is the number one reason why I think Convoke isn't as good, because there are so many boss fights where you have some sort of off target that you don't want to be hitting. But you can't really choose who to hit with this ability, and therefore I just think it's really bad. Just think about infinite stars here. In progression, it is really important to hit the correct targets at all times, no matter how many other targets there are. So if half or even more than half of your damage is hitting non-important targets, I'd say that's really, really bad. The last 2-3 bosses in Castle Nathria are also going to be pretty AD heavy, and therefore it just makes Night Fae that much worse in my opinion. So my conclusion is, if you are in a raiding guild and you don't mind coordinating and min-maxing the Kyrian ability, then I would say go Kyrian. It should be better overall. For anyone else, go Night Fae. If you don't feel like coordinating this ability properly, if you don't feel like min-maxing who to buff, if you just don't want to be reliant on another person, then go Night Fae. In the end, both covenants are going to be really good. On some fights, one is going to be better, and on some fights, the other one is going to be better. So I would say pick whatever you feel like, considering the pros and cons. Also remember, you can switch your first covenant without going through a lot of trouble. So if you end up going Night Fae first, but you would want to switch to Kyrian later on, that's not going to be a big deal. Or also the other way around. Alright, so I hope this helped for you to choose your covenant. And I hope you really enjoy Shadowlands and have fun, alright? Hope to see you on my next video, and remember to sub to my channel if you haven't yet. It would be very much appreciated. So thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye!